Hey everybody, this is Gabe from Best Words. What if the Secret Service picked the president? And what should that tell us about whether or not we should pack the Supreme Court if we get the chance? That might sound kind of insane and like a non sequitur, but this has happened in the past, right? If you look at ancient Rome, the Praetorian Guards, who were the people in charge of the emperor and his physical safety, eventually assumed so much power that they began choosing and killing emperors. In the Ottoman Empire, you had the same thing. The Janissaries, the elite guards, eventually chose the Sultan, and if they didn't like the Sultan, killed the Sultan. These are examples of institutions that had a role, and that role changed with the times, and because the context of the greater government did not alter enough to meet these new centers of power, these new centers of power took control. You have to have government that is flexible enough to recognize the contextual changes in the world, or the Secret Service winds up choosing the president. Let's look at American dysfunction. Let's look at the Senate and let's look at the Supreme Court. Now, the Senate, I always like to say, is bullshit. States are bullshit. It's ridiculous. States are glorified counties with their own license plates and their own quarters, right? Like, that's it. There's nothing about a state. It's a line on a map to give it this incredible legal power, and this it just doesn't compute. Why not? What's going on with states? Well, this did make sense, right? In the 1800s, in the 1700s, it made a lot of sense. So I say now that giving each state 2 senators is utterly asinine and indefensible. People say, well, you got to read your civics, and each state's represented as an equal, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that made sense back then. It doesn't make sense now. The states in the 18th century were literally different states, like in the European sense of the word. Most people don't know this, but the Civil War was not the first shooting war between American states. Pennsylvania and Virginia had a long-running history of violent border skirmishes over the area that is now Pittsburgh. New York and Vermont almost went to war in the late 18th century. Any notion now in 2020 that the states are different states is indefensible, and the idea that Wyoming should have 2 senators and California should have 2 senators is ridiculous. Either we reduce the number of states that exist out there where there's very little population density, or we change the model, or the United States dissolves into this festering entity that cannot deal with the global problems it faces. You know, that might sound extreme, but I don't think it is. The Senate is inherently a drag on ideas that need to keep up with the times. And you might say that's how it was designed, right? They say it's the upper house. It's designed to slow things down. No upper house in the world has the power of the U.S. Senate. And fun fact, no upper house in any U.S. state has the relative power of the U.S. Senate. We have 49 state senates where the seat is apportioned by population. Southern states in the early 1900s tried to set up their own kind of in-house electoral colleges and have each county represented by 2 state senators and have the votes counted by different regions. And this is all struck down by the court because it's a violation of equal protection. It's a violation of the concept of one person and one vote. If any state in 2020 tried to set it up so that every county got 2 state senators, that would be struck down by a conservative or a liberal court. Although, who knows, the court has gone off the rails. You cannot have in the United States a situation where some voter is given orders of magnitude more power in this body than other voters based on where they live and expect an outcome that is not severely warped. America is about to face, we have a government legitimacy crisis that is based on the 19th and 18th century structure of our government. We have pending ecological catastrophe, and we can't deal with it. We cannot deal with it because of the Senate and now the Supreme Court. What's going on in the Supreme Court? Okay. And what should Biden do about it? Well, I think the answer is obviously 13 justices. at least 13 justices. We should not be shy. I mean, there's a very strong rational reason to increase the size of the Supreme Court. The court is much too small for what needs to be done. In fact, you probably need a 27-person Supreme Court with 3 different panels. The court is now also ideologically off the rails, right? It's 6-3, far right. Just the other day, we saw Kavanaugh's decision in Wisconsin, which was riddled with factual errors and just horrifically bad about Wisconsin votes that arrive after Election Day not being counted, even if they're postmarked Election Day. I mean, this is violating all precedent, all common sense. He said that there's a legal interest in knowing who the winner is on election night. That's just the president's demented ramblings being funneled into a Supreme Court decision. That's not based on law or even reality. Like, the states don't declare winners on election night. CNN and NBC do, not the states. The states take weeks to certify elections, and they should. But now we have a far-right Supreme Court. Amy Coney Barrett is a lunatic and will do exactly what she's been bred to do in service of her freak show religious beliefs. And we can't shy away from that. We cannot come to grips with the fact that Republicans in the Federalist Society have one goal, right? And that is to keep minority rule, political and ideological and religious minority rule over the majority of the United States. And suppressing voter rights is that goal. So what is the bottom line here? Is the Secret Service going to wind up picking the president? Institutions of government can either change their form or change their function in a changing world. Let's look at the Japanese royal family, right? We don't know a ton about the history of the early Japanese royal family. All we know is that they unified the country, they seized power, and then within a few hundred years, they were relegated to a purely ceremonial role. Because the country was fractious, you couldn't hold it together, there's various warlords competing for power. So you had somebody that went from having, late medieval, almost absolute power to having no power at all. You change the form or you change the function. In that case, they were committed to the form. So the function changed. The Roman Senate changed innumerably over the years, but the trappings didn't change that much. In 200 BC, the Roman Senate was arguably the most powerful deliberative body in the world, and being a member of the Roman Senate came with a lot of responsibilities, and you had a lot of real say-so in the Roman world. Fast forward 200 years. Augustus is in power. You still have a Roman Senate. Augustus was this is not widely known, but Augustus was obsessed with the trappings of the Roman Republic and pretending he was not stomping all over Roman tradition. Because it was, at that time, a deep-seated Roman aversion to kingship and one-man rule. So he wasn't called the emperor, at least not to his face. He was called the princeps, the first citizen. Augustus never lost focus on getting the stamp of perceived legitimacy in what were ultimately decisions he made by himself. Fast forward a few hundred more years, right, to 300 AD, 400 AD, there's still a Roman Senate. After the founding of Constantinople, there's still a Western Senate. There's still the trappings of power, the perception of power. There's still rich guys in togas hanging out in a really good zip code in Rome and eating well. But at the end of the day, the Roman Senate in the 4th century AD was a glorified city council. They'd fallen a long way, but the trappings remained the same. The function had changed, but the form remained the same because the world changed, and they weren't willing to change the structure, the form of the decision-making apparatus, so you had one person seizing power. All throughout the Roman history, from the early Republic to the late Empire, you had, every year you had a consul, a quaestor, a praetor, a tribune of the people. Even in the 4th and 5th century AD, before the empire fell the last time, you had consuls. They had no power, right? They were mayors, right? They were mayors, and the Roman Senate was a city council. But the form didn't change. They were committed to the form over the function. And this brings us back to the United States government today. We are obsessed with the form of the government. 2 senators for every state. 9 Supreme Court justices, states having this incredibly exalted role as just regional municipalities that we don't give to counties and we don't give to regions like the Pacific Northwest. It's the state. And the state, I would argue, the modern U.S. state, does not make a ton of sense to be given this sub-sovereign power. State sovereignty as a concept is not well suited to the modern world. I will say that I'm a big fan of like local initiatives. I believe that the states can be laboratories for democracy, but I do not believe that giving the states equal representation as unique bodies in the Senate is at all worthwhile or a good idea or justifiable. We are either committed to maintaining the form of the United States government, and that is, again, 2 senators per every state, Supreme Court and 9 justices, or we are committed to the function of the United States government and the promise of the United States government. And if we're going to do that, we need to take a hard look at scrapping the Senate, obviously scrapping the Electoral College, changing the size and shape of the Supreme Court. All of this stuff needs to change. The world's going to change. Our government is the most poorly designed amongst the major industrial powers of the 21st century because it's the oldest. You know, it's the same reason that London had gas lamps after most other world cities put in electric lamps. Why? Because London was rich earlier and they had a more extensive network of gas lamps. And so newer cities that became wealthier later leapfrogged them with electric technology. You see this now, right? In East Africa, a huge proportion of banking is done over people's phones, like way more than is done in the United States. If we don't re-examine the structure of our government, we are going to lose the function of our government, and in a few generations, the Secret Service is going to be handpicking the president.